Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Duncan. I'm the host of the podcast Landscape North. Today, I have the exciting opportunity to have Walter Kehm as my guest. So, Walter, before we get started, maybe you could just give a brief overview of yourself and where you came to get to this point.
Thanks, Chris. I'm a landscape architect, and I've been practicing for a few years now, a few decades now, actually. And I was the director of the School of Landscape Architecture at the University of Guelph. And I have my own consulting practice, Walter Kehm and Associates, dealing with waterfront park development, ecological restoration. Internationally, I have a project in Egypt and Cyprus.
Wow.
So I've always worked at an international level, as well as national, as well as local.
Nice. Well, today our discussion is going to be more focused on two issues, obviously COVID and then your new book, Accidental Wilderness, that was first launched in November. And I think before we got started, you mentioned that you're going to be doing a second printing in February. Congratulations.
Yeah, yes. Then in a couple of weeks, it'll be out for a second printing. It's selling well.
That's awesome. Now, is it available on Amazon, or where can someone?
Well, University of Toronto Press has the best price, actually, and it's also on Amazon.
Nice.
But those are the two major players now. Because of COVID, the bookstores normally would have it.
Right.
But the Toronto Public Library bought 14 copies, and now they have 210 people on the waiting list. So it's better to buy the book than if you want to really read it.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you'll be here a year from now.
Yeah, exactly.
And Margaret Atwood will take over a year from now.
Well, where did the idea and the inspiration for the book come from?
You know, you're hitting at the root of who I am. And that is a kid from a low-income immigrant neighborhood in New York City who grew up with concrete and asphalt.
Yes.
Didn't have a park in the neighborhood. But we had wetlands at what was Idlewild Airport, now Kennedy Airport. The airport is now surrounded by wetlands in the Jamaica Bay Gateway National Park. And then, you know, on Easter, we would go to Prospect Park, and then I would go into Central Park, and then the Bronx Botanical Garden. And I just became fascinated with plants. But the real fascination was playing handball in the schoolyard. And there was a tree, an Atlanthus altissima, growing up between the expansion joint, between the concrete and the building. And then if you play twig ball on a sidewalk, you'd have a twig in the middle expansion joint. And with your Spalding pink ball, you had to move the twig from the middle expansion joint to the opponent's expansion joint. And whoever got that first won.
Right.
But you always had to pull the grass out of the expansion joint. And I'd say to myself, yeah, I'm a young kid, 8, 9, 10. I'd say to my mother, why are grasses growing here? My mother was a gardener, right?
Right.
She came from a farm background in Germany. So we always had plants in the house, in the garden. And I would ask her those simple little questions. Oh, Walter, don't ask me, I don't know. God. So anyway, I started studying biology and I got interested in forestry and went to State University of Forestry at Syracuse and completed a forestry training there for 2.5 years. And I decided I would mix forestry with landscape architecture because I wanted to not only cut down trees and measure the economic value, but I became more and more concerned and interested in how people relate to wilderness and forests. And I worked in Mount Hood and fire suppression teams, Adirondacks and surveying with spruce blowdown. So I combined my degree in forestry with landscape architecture, another year at university, and then decided to pursue urban design and landscape at Harvard with Hideo Sasaki. And following that, a postgraduate for a year at the American Academy in Rome, where I was studying European urban development and interested in agriculture, forestry, and urbanization, and how a regional landscape could work. And always concerned about ecology and agriculture could meet with cities, and cities could then interchange with the land. So those have been the premises of which my continuous work now, my second book, is going to be designing for wilderness. Really? And how we bring nature into cities in a genuine way. Not what I'm seeing now with contemporary parks design, lollipop trees and grass. It's still going on strong.
Right. And so from when did you start the book, and how long did it take you to finish the book?
Well, I started 18 months ago.
Okay.
And well, really, Chris, I started 35 years ago.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Because I had the commission to do the master plan for Tommy Thompson Park. It was going all over the lot. We had an airport going there, Billy Bishop. We had a rowing course. We had Disneyland. We had a aquatic museum. We had ball diamonds, even a dome stadium. And it was called Aquatic Park, and there was to be a huge marina, a 1,000-boat marina. I mean, all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And I was called in to say, can you make peace with all the warring bodies? We had friends of the spit, we had friends of this, friends of boats, friends of bikers, friends of motorcycles, you name it. We had friends of everybody, including friends of bankers. They wanted to develop the death. So, it really started then, but Peter Del Tredici from the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard was visiting Toronto just over 18 months ago, and he asked me if I could take him around the spit, because his work has always been urban foraging, how plants develop in the urban environment. And I took him out to the spit. We were on bikes, and we spent a half a day, and came back, and he said, well, Walter, I'm a scientist. What have you written? And I said, Peter, I have it. It's all in drawings and photographs. I've got thousands of photographs, decade by decade by decade. And he gave me a kick in the ass, and he said, Walter, you must write. So that's when it started, 18 months ago. But I felt it was such an important book technically in terms of the bird migrations, the plant regenerations, the fish that had moved in, the mammals, the otter, the beaver, the mink, the coyote. I said, it has to be visual because the technical has to be something that people can really see. It's difficult to just talk about this park. It's bigger than Central Park. It's one of the largest urban parks in the world. People don't realize 5 kilometers into Lake Ontario, 800 plus acres, larger than Central Park in New York City, equally important in terms of biodiversity and worldwide recognition of its role as an international bird center, but nobody knew about it.
Right.
And even to this day, I ask people, do you know where the spit is? Who? Tommy Thompson Park. Where? So I have to say the Portland. Well, where's that?
Right.
So, to this day, it's kind of, Toronto Islands are iconic and Ontario Place. But Tommy Thompson is still a bit off the radar. So the book is helping change that.
That's great. And then obviously with the pandemic, it's been probably more utilized than it ever has been before in growing and function for the downtown Toronto community.
Well, Chris, that's a fascinating question because I mentioned to you previously, I go to Tommy Thompson Park. I also go to Trillium Park that we finished just a few years ago.
Right.
I don't say I'm a landscape architect and all the stuff that would say to people, oh, he's a professional. Oh, no. I go there incognito on my bicycle. I dress like a rummy. I just sort of fit into the landscape, bicycle hat. And I see people, 4 kids, 5 kids, 2 couples, and they're playing in the rubble. And I say, oh my God, your kids are having fun today. Oh yes, they just love it here. We've been here 4 hours. We can't get the kids away.
Wow.
Oh, how come? Well, we live downtown Toronto off Dundas Street, and we heard about the park, and we're all sequestered in our homes, and we just don't like our local playground with the manufactured play structures. The kids don't want to go there. But we discovered Tommy Thompson Park, and they're now building a little home out of the bricks and the rubble. And I watched this 8-year-old little girl. She was building a teeter-totter. She found a concrete block and put a log on top. And she was making her own little play structure. So not given to her by male-dominated play industry, but she made her own thing in a true adventure playground. And I'm finding this on and on and on with elderly people, with people in 600 square foot condos.
Sure. Yeah.
And they go there for mental release, physical exercise, and I would add one, perhaps even more importantly, spiritual connection to nature.
Sure.
And we don't really talk about that enough, but it's a big subject. It's my next book about where do we come from? How do we relate in terms of biophilia to the natural world? mean, why do people have dogs and birds in their house and animals, pets? I mean, we have this fundamental, we are of nature, we are nature. So to be denied that is really, it develops psychoses. Look at the cottage industry.
Oh,
People
absolutely.
flee the
Yeah.
city, right? But a lot of people can't flee the city. But now they can go to nature, experience an urban wild at Tommy Thompson Park or at Trillium Park or Toronto Islands. And so, I mean, that really is a deeply held feeling by people. They can have an adventure when they go to Tommy Thompson Park. It's
Right.
not controlled. They can make their own pathway. They can find a little niche by the water edge, and he and she just sit on a concrete block surrounded by shrubs. It self-segregates, you know, you don't have big masses
That's right.
of
Yep.
people. Not possible because there aren't big spaces to congregate in.
Right. And so where do you see the evolution of Tommy Thompson Park?
Well, you know, another interesting question, Chris. I've been evaluating so many urban parks in Toronto and other cities. I'll give you an example. Take a look at Christie Pitts. It's an old quarry, right?
Yep.
And you look at it and it's a trapezoidal type of thing. You got these steep slopes on each side. And what are they? They're grass slopes. I mean, that Christie Pitts could be an urban forest.
Oh,
Now,
absolutely.
if you
Yeah.
go into what's happening historically in China and Japan, every community had its sacred forest because the forest gave you protection. It preserved the water, it cleaned the air, you had birds. You felt as if your home was living in nature because every community had a sacred forest to which you would even wrap trees with red to feel your connection to another world, the creator, whoever that creator is for you.
Right.
So I'm suggesting that we maybe really have to look at our city parks, that maybe they have much more of the wilderness and feeling and wild feeling rather than being manicured to death with grass and lollipop trees.
Right.
I mean, Hyde Park is so important because it does give you that
Absolutely.
feeling,
Yeah.
you know, and the ravine systems. But I look at a lot of the new urban parks being developed in Toronto, and there's even an emphasis on we don't want trees because they're dirty, because they drop leaves, and that's maintenance. And we don't want shrubs because, you know, they take maintenance. You know,
All
you
right.
talk to the maintenance people of the city of Toronto, and we have a couple of projects we're working on.
Right.
And I'm saying, really? Oh yeah, we have a budget cutback, so we really can't afford to maintain our parks. We have to keep them simple. What does that mean? Grass and maybe one or two trees, honey locusts because they have small leaves.
Right.
So I think we have a crisis right now in the philosophy, urban parks philosophy. What is nature in the city? And of course, we can go with the green roofs and wilderness on the roofs,
Right.
and bees and pollinator species on rooftops. So it's a big subject, and I think there's a need for a lot of new discussion about what is an urban park.
And that discussion, do you think should need to be taken place at the public realm or at the education level?
I think it's at both levels.
Right.
Robert Burley and Robert is the photographer of the book, Accidental Wilderness. We're hosting a series of public seminars with Ryerson and the University of Toronto.
Okay.
And there'll be virtual seminars, but we want to delve into this question of what is a public park today. Now, the problem is the word park.
Right.
Because that conjures up images immediately of the nice, neat, orderly, 18th century greensward and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
If you think of every open space has a potential for being a nature space.
Probably
So,
a better term. Yeah. Yeah.
you look at the recent proposal for University Avenue. Well, I mean, it makes such sense. Look at the Queens Quay area right now in Toronto. It is a total disaster. The East Bayfront is the ugliest buildings. It could be a great Ramblas, a great Barcelona Ramblas, a great promenade. Okay, we've developed the water edge a bit with trees, all in a straight row, paving and trees. That's it. That's as far as landscape is concerned. Yeah, we miss a whole layer of shrubs and herbaceous material, perennial material. But if you look at Queens Quay, I really am not sure of what the image of the city is on this most important waterfront street.
Right.
And I think Lynch wrote about the book called The Image of the City. And the image of the city has so much to do with its streets and its open spaces, not necessarily parks, but the urban character, the cultural landscape. If you come in from Toronto, the only place you have a green connection is coming in from Buffalo. And then you hit the Lakeshore Boulevard and the Humber Bay waterfront.
Right,
And that's
right.
really the gateway to the city. Of course, we've got the narrowest little stretch left over because everything is rail corridor and roads.
Right.
So we got a remnant green gateway to the city. Coming from the east, well, what do you get? Kingston Road? Come on.
Yeah.
And then you come down the Don Valley parking lot. So, I mean, we had that from the north, the Spadina, come on. So there's a lot to think about here in terms of what we want as a city. I mean, suppose I made a hypothesis that Toronto should be a forest city, like London, Ontario is a forest city. Well, what would that mean then in terms of public policy on nature? I mean, right now we have these minimum standards for putting trees in little tree wells.
Right.
You make a 3-foot circle on Queens Quay and dump a tree in there and say, please live. And,
Exactly.
And then, by the way, we're going to put a new system of soil underneath, and maybe that'll work. There's really a lack of a real biological understanding of nature in the city. And that goes right back to your first question, that if we don't have an understanding, I think Europeans are much better at this, a biological understanding of how cities can be green.
And my travels through Europe, I'm always amazed at the history and yet the forward thinking of how they've designed their cities. To blend the old with the new and still maintain that history, but urban development has not taken over in Europe like the way it has here in North America.
I'm looking at places like Rotterdam right now, Holland particularly, Denmark. I'm just working on a project from McMaster University. And I'm saying, listen, why are we using asphalt for roads? Why not deal with recycled material where we can deal with bioluminescence?
Right.
So we can get away from the streetlights. The bicycle paths will be self-illuminating, which they're doing in Holland and Denmark. Denmark, with its urban expressway, elevated expressway for bikes. And the latest from Rotterdam, which I'm extremely interested in, and they have the pressure of being a country below ocean level, so they have to be concerned about water. I wish we had some of these tragedies to make us think creatively. But to which every rooftop, by law now, by policy, by law, has to be a rainwater detention center. So every roof has to be green, but not only green, they have to have a cistern, a water collection system that can control maybe 50 or 60% of the runoff from every building. Well, if every building did that, think of the lessening of water flowing into the Rhine River and lessening the propensity for flooding. But even further, this is where the smart city comes in. Every rooftop is tied into a central forecasting system 1 week in advance as to the anticipated precipitation. So if you're going to get 50 millimeters, 100 millimeters, they will decant the water from their cisterns in advance so that when the rains come, they can capture the water again and then mitigate flooding. Amazing. Well, you might think this is silly, but in North America, but when you talk about cities like Miami and New York,
absolutely.
The need for, in Miami particularly, in New York City, look at Hurricane Katrina, the subways became cesspools.
Oh, yeah. New Orleans and
exactly.
Texas,
New Orleans
absolutely.
Below sea level. So these kinds of policies are just so far removed from our urban design planning right now in Toronto. And whether you like the Skylab's Google proposal, the idea of a smart city really deals with that.
Correct.
And we've lost that opportunity in the waterfront. Maybe the new competition will address that. But I think of all the condos under construction in Toronto, and we say, oh, we have the greatest number of condos in North America. Say, give me a break. What is every roof doing? What condo in Toronto is thinking in terms of nature? And you know, and we still have Bayview area flooding. We have the Spadina, underneath the Spadina, York floods. We have flooding in the city, you know.
Absolutely.
So now we're spending $1.2 billion to create a new river, because we don't want the Flatlands to flood, but we could have reduced the
The
runoff
volume.
at the
Yep,
source,
correct.
you know. So where do you put your money?
Yep.
And I think that's got to be quite a conversation. It should be, looked at carefully.
Absolutely.
Maybe these forums we're hosting at Ryerson and the University of Toronto and other places. I'm just writing an article for a Chinese journal. 100,000 people in this journal. I'm anxious to see what they're doing. But, if you look at the Chinese who now, I just said you have to have a disaster, the Chinese have a disaster, whether it's air or polluted water.
Absolutely. Yep.
So their landscape architects are turning to us to see what we can do to assist them with their urban remediation issues.
Right.
Kind of fascinating to have this opportunity, all because of accidental wilderness.
Right. Well, good for you. That's great. One final question, so we can wrap this up, because it's going to be published in the Ground magazine. What would you say, knowing what you've been through in your lifetime, what would you say to someone who's considering a career in landscape architecture today?
Oh, what an interesting question. My whole practice, my whole life is about global thinking. And why do we have birds from South America flying through Toronto and Leslie Street Spit? Why do we have trees from China and plants from Tierra del Fuego in South America growing in Tommy Thompson Park?
Right.
So we have these world migrations of people, of wildlife, of ocean currents, river currents, animal migration, climate change, trees moving northward, all in their own, because the seeds are finding nice territory. We'll have a palm tree in the Arctic one day.
Right.
So I would say to students, if you have an interest in global ecosystems and global survivability, and you're thinking of a profession that you help address societal issues, economic issues, livability issues, then you should look at landscape architecture, because you can work from a residential garden with all that implies,
right.
Stormwater runoff, habitat creation,
absolutely.
Materials you use, you're going to put asphalt in your driveway, you're going to use red cedar in your fences. All these little micro actions have global significance. So it's a profession that can go from a macro planning, ecology, sociology, psychology, mental health aspects, right down to local development of communities with happy families, safe streets, physical needs, spiritual needs, mental needs. It's a profession that's integrative, and it's not involved with the ego. It's a matter of how you can work as part of the community to create a better world. And that's what I would say to them.
Yeah. Great. Any follow-up? When's your next book coming out?
I try to get time to work on it now. I was just sorting out pages a minute ago. It's certainly looking a lot more into mental health and spiritual health, and going back historically to the Romanticism, the 18th century, 19th century, the revivalist movements, but also trying to put Homo sapiens in a perspective of our relationship to nature. A guy named Nash wrote a book called Wilderness and the American Mind. And, this whole idea of the First Nations and wilderness and indigenous people and different mindsets about the creation story. And, how that's still, I think it lingers in people's minds that, they look at water, they look at infinite space, they look at the sunrise. They don't like a cloudy day. They don't like pollution. Well, why isn't it they don't like pollution? Is it they like innately clean water? What triggers something in the DNA of a person's mind? Maybe all the way back to Olduvai Gorge, when we first learned to go off their fours and onto two legs. So maybe there's Neanderthal in us, that maybe there's Olduvai Gorge in us, there's something in us that in our DNA that says we are of nature. And that you ought to explore that a bit more, because the more and more we build cities, we're denying nature.
Sure. Yeah,
we're shutting out nature. And the more we shut it out, you have deprivation. The more we have deprivation, people start to say, hey, I've lost something. And now Tommy Thompson shows them they found something. So that's my quest. That's where I am now.
Right.
Maybe a year from now, we'll get together again. And 2 years from
book.
now, we'll have another book.
That sounds great to me.
This is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for your feedback today. I really appreciate the time to talk about the book and to be on the podcast.
I enjoyed your questions, Chris. Thank you so much. This is
you're very
great.
welcome.
All right.
Great.
Hope we can chat again.
Sounds good to me.
Good. Thanks,
Walter.
Chris.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.